What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We are continuing to monitor that area of interest currently over the main development region as we get more data and information to kind of look over, as well as kind of some more ensemble runs and even the operational runs starting to catch up and show that this thing could potentially organize and develop. So we're going to have to keep close tabs on that as we continue to see more and more convection, more and more stuff starting to fire off in the main development region as well. So that's the main focus for today's video. We're going to go ahead and start with the National Hurricane Center's latest advisory right over here. We have a 0-20 probability for the next 7 days, and we also are starting to see in that area of interest starting to encompass some more of the Lesser Antilles over there. So that's something that we're going to have to watch because this does actually pose a relatively big threat to land, at least in the long term. Short term, it's not going to really do too much right away, but long term, it's definitely going to pose a bigger threat to land, especially the Lesser Antilles and Puerto Rico down the road. But let's go ahead and dive right into it real quickly. An area of low pressure could form in the central portion of the tropical Atlantic in a few days. Thereafter, the environmental conditions appear generally favorable for some slow development of the system this weekend and to early next week. As it moves westward, this system, moves westward, as it moves westward to west-northwestward at 10 to 15 miles per hour. I apologize for not reading that correctly. 20% chance of formation in the next 7 days. So overall, not much of a change in the probabilities right now. But we are tagging this. We are keeping an eye on this because this does pose a relatively big threat towards the Lesser Antilles, as we have been looking at some ensemble runs and operational runs, having this organized into a relatively robust tropical cyclone as it approaches over there. So we're going to have to pay attention to that. But down the road, we're looking at other areas of interest to pay attention to as well, not just designated by the NHC, but also an increasing amount off the coast of Africa over here. There's a tropical wave coming off the coast that could organize and develop. We're also looking at some areas of development in the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean Sea off the Central American Gyre potentially, as well as a few other areas that we're going to have to pay attention to. So ultimately, that's just the kind of stuff we're going to have to keep very close tabs on, and that's just stuff we're going to have to continue to pay very, very close attention to right now. So that's what we're looking at with the satellite imagery. Based on the satellite imagery, let's go ahead and zoom in to the central tropical Atlantic over here and kind of give you a general dose of what we're looking at. We are seeing more convection starting to organize in the intertropical convergence zone, or ITCZ. This is the area where the tropical wave is going to organize and start to develop as it moves closer to the Lesser Antilles. It's not expected to really do too much for the next couple of days, but starting at about, I'd say, 48 hours or so, you're going to start seeing some signs of rotation. Maybe a little bit of outflow might kick up here or there, and you might see a yellow or orange X, depending on what the NHC ends up doing, going on over there, and kind of giving us an idea of what could possibly be forming as we continue to see that low area, at least broad low pressure start to organize in the central MDR. And where it's at right now is in some relatively good conditions to end up doing that. And it'll be kind of interesting to see how the whole thing plays out going forward in the next few days. And it's kind of an interesting thing that I'm looking forward to taking a look at and kind of seeing how this tropical system will evolve off of the ITCZ and how it'll kind of allow for be kind of the point where this system finally starts to roar awake at this season, at least in that regard, because we had Debbie and Ernesto, which I said were going to be the kickoffs to it. I still hold on to that very quickly. However, with another area of interest being tagged by the NHC, as well as another tropical wave coming off the coast of Africa, which we can go ahead and show you right now. Let's go ahead and move out to the eastern Atlantic. It's this giant tropical wave right there that could cause some trouble down the road. And this is what I'm concerned about, because this tropical wave is actually a lot further to the south than a lot of the waves we've seen recently. Recently, we've seen waves move through Mauritania, Mali, Senegal, those areas right there, and kind of emerge off the coast of Africa around 15 to 16 degrees north. This one is moving, and it's kind of at about 10 degrees north, which ultimately will help allow for a little bit better chance of organization and development. And I wouldn't be surprised that in the next few days, the National Hurricane Center tags this as an area of interest as well in the main development region, mainly because it's a tropical wave. It's actually a pretty large and robust tropical wave. And I will tell you this right now, there is a lot of convection with this, and this does look relatively scary right now, but as it moves out into the Atlantic Ocean, it's going to end up losing a lot of that flare and a lot of that convection. It's known as the splashdown. It's kind of how what we were paying attention to, the splashdown effect with that, and that's what we're going to end up probably seeing is some of the ensembles maybe start to retract and regress quite a bit before we start seeing a signal pickup once again. That's typically something that that happens with these kinds of storms as they move towards the main development region and then start to use the intertropical convergence zone to kind of get a new source of convection. So ultimately a very normal case of it right there, but this is an area to watch for sure. We're also paying attention to the western tropical Atlantic as well. We're watching a couple areas to watch. First of all, in Central America and the Caribbean Sea, as well as in the western half of the Gulf of Mexico, as I've looked at some of the European and GFS ensembles, and there is a little bit of support with this, but the consensus has been growing gradually of something potentially organizing and developing in the Caribbean Sea, moving through the Yucatan Peninsula or very close to the Yucatan Peninsula, and either impacting Texas or Mexico over here in the next 10 days. And that's something we're going to have to pay attention to. What I'm also paying attention to as well is a lot of this mesoscale convection going on across much of the Gulf of Mexico right here. That's going to ultimately help with a few factors right here. First of all, with water vapor. Where the Gulf of Mexico is, it's in an area of very moist, it's a very moist area right there within the Gulf and all that stuff right there, and that convection is really helping moisten the atmosphere over there and ultimately making it more primed for development in that regard. Also, same thing in the Caribbean Sea. We're seeing a lot of mesoscale convection burst up in the Greater Antilles, particularly Cuba, the Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and Jamaica, and we're kind of seeing that help moisten up the atmosphere and allow for more tropical systems to organize and develop and kind of have a better time with better moisture. We are noticing some dry air in the eastern Caribbean Sea, but that's relatively isolated compared to the rest of the ocean over here, rest of the sea, as well as the Atlantic Basin. It's relatively isolated, and that's something you're going to have to pay attention to. It's all the little things that we're looking at right now, but once they start to add up, it makes a lot more sense, and it makes a lot more of a reason why we're talking about this right here. So let's go ahead and go to the Atlantic-wide area right here, at least with the Atlantic wide, and we'll go ahead and go to the water vapor imagery right here. The water vapor imagery is pretty interesting, to say the very least. Main development region, very moist and very primed for organization and development. Also, you're seeing the wind shear levels continue to trend down, down, down over there, and there is still a little bit of wind shear in the Gulf of Mexico, but there is a new pattern that's moving through the southern half of the United States that's going to enter there and push all that wind shear out as that ridge continues to start to move further to the east in the upper Midwest over there. And I know that there's a lot of corn sweat over there. There's a lot of moisture. I know it's very hot up there. It's partly, in fact, impacted by that ridge and that weak high-pressure system that's currently over there. And that's a high-pressure system, as well as the synoptic flow with it, is going to allow for the Gulf of Mexico to lose a lot of that shear and make it more primed for tropical development. So all of this is connected. A lot of the synoptic stuff is really connected in that regard. So that's what we're paying attention to. Another thing we're paying attention to is that dry air that's becoming less and less of a inhibitor in the subtropical Atlantic Ocean as we get more and more waves coming off the coast of Africa. Matter of fact, the next 3 waves after this one that's currently trying to organize in the main development region are ones where I'm heightening my concern and heightening my warning, at least my alert levels in that, because we have one that has a good chance of developing. It's pushed a bit further to the south than a lot of the other runs. or not the other ones, but the other waves. We have one right afterward in Central Africa, and one in East Central Africa to pay attention to as well. As it's all three of those are going to be entering a very good environment for tropical development, and that's why I said in the title and thumbnail, a potential hyperactive pattern is underway. Not just because of those waves, but also because of the main development region, as well as the Caribbean Sea with the gyre and the Gulf of Mexico as well, according to some ensemble runs. Let's go ahead and show you the water sea surface temperatures to kind of give you some data to take a look at right here. Here's the sea surface temperatures that we have pulled up for you right now. Here's the waters that we're continuing to watch. The waters are very warm across the main development region, where this wave is expected to come off of and kind of organize and develop is in an area of around 27 degrees Celsius waters, which is about 81 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you living in the United States in Puerto Rico. And ultimately, it's going to be kind of taking its time to organize and develop if it ends up happening. And I hope the NHC tags it in the next few days, just because I've been seeing a lot of ensemble support with it as well as the other stuff that we're paying attention to in the MDR, Central MDR currently. So that's something to watch right there, as well as the fact that as this continues to push further to the west, the system is going to be entering warmer waters around 28 degrees Celsius, about 82.4 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you living in the United States, just for context right there. And it's going to be entering better conditions. You have the warmer waters over here, and you have this 29 to 30 degrees Celsius bathtub over here across the central MDR, where all this convection is starting to at least try to get into and start firing off of. So yeah, we got to start small. We got to start somewhere. So that's what we're looking at in the MDR in the western Atlantic Ocean over here. Waters continuing to be piping hot across the Caribbean Sea. Look at how warm the Eastern Caribbean is right now. We're looking at a lot of areas of 30 plus degrees Celsius of waters, or 86 degrees Fahrenheit, and that just isn't even isolated over there. It's really encompassed much of the Gulf of Mexico, the northwestern Caribbean Sea. In fact, the western half of the Gulf is still at 31 degrees Celsius or 88 degrees Fahrenheit. Matter of fact, in the Bolivar Strait near Galveston, they're finding water temperatures of almost 90 degrees Fahrenheit. I've been to Galveston before. I've been to that part of the country before. I would not want to go swimming in that, and that's just something that I would personally not do, because it's not going to feel good, to say the very least. Not only that, but you're also dealing with the heat down there, with the sand and everything like that. So ultimately, if you're in Texas and Louisiana, swimming is probably not the best idea unless you want to take a quick bath in the ocean. So just a suggestion right there, just something I'd kind of point out as I continue to move on to the next topic. Let's go ahead and show you the climate reanalyzer once again, kind of see what we're potentially looking at. Yeah, we're kind of seeing that kind of stagnation in the sea surface temperatures. Once again, we were talking about that before. We're going to keep talking about it as well. So that's just something to pay attention to. This is going to kind of stay that way, at least for the next 3 weeks or so, and then finally start to cool off as hurricane season goes underway. And that's kind of the last we will talk about this climate reanalyzer, at least for the next few days or so. We might highlight this a little bit on stream and all that this week when I do talk about that. But ultimately, the in-depth climate reanalyzer stuff is going to start slowing down a little bit. But I will show you the SST anomaly maps just one more time. Water warm in the tropics, much warmer than average. That's the main thing you need to take away with that in terms of the climate reanalyzer. Ocean heat content continues to be a very large issue, especially as we start to see this ramp up in activity across the Atlantic. Ocean heat content continues to be very big across the western part of the main development region, Caribbean Sea, and the Gulf of Mexico, where this tropical wave on Africa is currently coming off of. This is part of the reason it's not going to develop right away. It's going to be entering an area of less than 25 to 50 OHC, and it's just ultimately the water's not deep enough for it to tap into and for allow it to organize. Also, it needs to find a convection source to really feed off of to get started. So that's just something I figured I'd highlight. But the area of interest in the central MDR right now, it's right now in an area of around, I'd say, 50 OHC, which is good for conducive strengthening. Then as it moves further to the west towards the Antilles, it starts to gradually and then rapidly escalate, getting up to about 100 OHC. That's good for rapid strengthening. And then anything over 100, where we're seeing 125 to 150 OHC closing in on the Lesser Antilles, that's not going to be very fun, especially if this system starts to become a tropical cyclone and gets up to tropical storm strength with low wind shear and plenty of moisture and plenty of vorticity as well as the Coriolis force, of course. Just getting over there and starting to tap into that bank and tap into all that fuel over there. That's the ocean heat content in that regard. The Caribbean Sea, we don't really need to talk about too much. Gulf of Mexico, yes, there's a lot of OHC over there. We don't really need to highlight this way too much anymore. I will absolutely highlight this if this system ends up going into the Caribbean, because that's my main concern. But ultimately, right now, you kind of know the OHC values. I've been beating them up like a dead horse, and I don't really need to go through that again. Let's go ahead and show you the wind shear map. Here's the latest wind shear that we have pulled up for you right now. Wind shear in the main development region is quieting down quite a lot, and where this convection is in the intertropical convergence zone, where the NHC has tagged the area of interest, it's in the area of about 10, 15, 20 knots of wind shear. So that's ultimately a situation that we're going to have to pay attention to in that regards. But all the way from where it's at, all the way to the Lesser Antilles, low wind shear. So ultimately, it's time to organize and develop what arguably, at least if it wants to do it starting in the next couple of days, it would arguably be between then and getting to the Antilles before heading to Puerto Rico and maybe even the Dominican Republic. So that's something you want to highlight. Also, look at the Caribbean Sea. Not very much wind shear anymore. That's going to be a bit of a problem, especially if this system enters the Caribbean Sea and instead pushes further to the south and does it all there. So ultimately, that's a bit of a concern right there. But the main development region, there's low wind shear, and that's also the reason I'm concerned about this tropical wave. And I think the NHC, in my opinion, should tag it. It's based on some of the ensemble support that I've been watching. And I wouldn't tag it maybe for the next 24 to 48 hours, but I would tag it at least some point in this week, because that's a pretty scary tropical wave to watch, and it's something to pay attention to. And this is why it's something to pay attention to right here. Let's go ahead and show you the 0Z runs right here. Here's the 0Z GFS right here. We have this tropical wave coming. We have this tropical wave in the central main development region, kind of taking its sweet time, organizing and developing. The models have been kind of fluctuating up and down. This is the GFS. The GFS has kind of been hit or miss with this signal, but it has been getting a lot more consistent, and it has been getting a lot more better with it. In that regards, we're still seeing a lot of ensemble runs picking up on this and potentially having this thing heading towards the Lesser Antilles and heading towards the Greater Antilles as well. But just for context, we can go ahead and show you the 12Z as well. The 12Z has it a lot more concentrated in that regards, and we are seeing a lot more scenarios of pretty strong systems heading towards that area. And I'll go ahead and zoom out on this a little bit, because we are seeing a couple of areas heading even deeper into the Caribbean off the coast of Cuba. But this is what the GFS is also picking up on. They have a lot of scenarios of this tropical wave organizing and developing in the eastern main development region, and that's why I'm raising red flags with that wave over there. Here's the European run right here. This is the 12Z European, I believe, from yesterday. This is the 0Z from today. So this is the 0Z from today. We can go ahead and show you that. Let's go ahead and zoom in on this. The 0Z European really wants a lot of this to ramp up, and a lot of these models want this to enter the Antilles. And there is a bit of a split that I'm noticing right here. As I'm noticing, at least with the split, we're seeing this either entering the Caribbean Sea or the Atlantic Basin, but not turning out just yet. And I am noticing that the trends are a little bit weaker, which for some would be relatively good news, but ultimately I'm playing in the long term with this forecast, and ultimately what I am paying attention to is the idea that basically the weaker the system is going to be, the further west it's going to end up pushing out. And that's my main concern, because that could raise more impacts and more concerns for Florida down the road, for the Dominican Republic, for Cuba, for Haiti. And even if this thing enters the Caribbean Sea, that would be the worst case scenario if it does that, because guess what's over there? A lot of ocean heat content and a lot of warm water and not enough wind shear to stop it. So That's the main concern with that over there. Checking out some operational runs right here. The runs haven't been really that great. They've been relatively hit or miss, but I do want to end with the CMC's 12Z run right here, having the system organizing and developing. Actually, no, that's not the 12. That was not the 12Z. It's been kind of hit or miss. It's actually the 0Z right here that I wanted to go ahead and highlight to you. 12Z CMC has the system organizing and developing. Takes its time to do that, but stays north of Hispaniola, and you see that signal going hit or miss. And the reason I show you a lot of this is because the ensembles are kind of the more consistent stuff, and the operational stuff needs to catch up. And that's kind of what I'll close off with you in that regard. So be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Helps us get more people engaged with weather. Also, we are less than 100 subscribers from 10,000, so be sure you hit the subscribe button so we can get there this week. Also, shout out to Daniel as an official sponsor of the Pat's Path Predictor channel. Be sure to join the Patreon to be a sponsor like him. Link is in the first link in the description down below. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.